We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are Baltimore positive. I am wearing my Coppin 125. I like this shirt, man. I got this shirt. I'm like, am I going to wear that? And then I wore it. I'm like, that's a good looking shirt. So I'm wearing the shirt. Luke Jones is here. We're going to be up late. Weather's going to be changing here this week. It's going to be nice and warm. I don't know who's going to be watching these 10 o'clock games out in Seattle this week, and then off to I was going to say Oakland, but it's really Sacramento at this point. I have some friends joining me. My one of my mentors in life turned out to be the sports editor of the Sacramento Bee for a long, long time. He's actually from Ocean City, Maryland. Tom Cousins is going to be joining us this week. Maury Brown's going to be joining us from out in Portlandia in Seattle to talk. I was going to say Seahawks. No, Mariners. Luke Jones is here to talk Oriole baseball with us after I would get my broom out, dude. But was too busy sweeping the worst team in the American League, Chicago White Sox. They won games over the weekend, and I almost looked up and said, "Are they 7 games under 500 yet? 500? No, they're still going to be 15 or 20 games under 500 for it." Even when you sweep and you get this far underneath, I heard Palmer over the weekend say they were chasing 500. Well, good luck with that. They're going to have to play Yankees baseball to get the 500. They have like 37 and 22 or something just to get the 500. Tip the cap. They beat the White Sox. They're not going to have a lot of 3-game sweeps this year, so let's celebrate the one they have.
Well, they finally have one, and it's June. So, but you're right, and I think, look, I mean, when you play as poorly as the Orioles played over the first 2 months of the season, you're looking for anything, right? I mean, we talked about this when they had their 3-game winning streak, the first one they had a little over a week ago. Then they lose a series to the Cardinals, and you say, okay, well, the Cardinals are better. As far as the major takeaway from a 3-game sweep over the White Sox, first and foremost, and I do want to say this, they're pitching better, and more specifically, their rotation is performing better. I mean, Charlie Morton was good on Sunday. On Saturday, Dean Kramer was good. Eflin was really good on Friday. It's amazing, no matter who the opponent is, how much more winnable these games feel when you pitch well. Because let's face it, they had issues over the weekend. I mean, they had base running gaffes on Sunday. I mean, they had some fielding miscues. I mean, they certainly did not hit the ball at a high level, but they got good starting pitching, and they even had a couple hiccups in the bullpen, and were still able to overcome it. So. What does a 3-game sweep over the White Sox prove? Well, it proves they're not the worst team in the American League. I think Chicago still comfortably has that title, but they have won 6 of 8. They've won 7 of 11. They haven't had even a stretch like that all year long. Is it fun? Yes. Is it indicative that they're playing better? Sure. Does that mean that they're about to go on this stretch where they're going to rip 13 of 14 or something like that? I don't see that, but
Well,
it
when
is.
I see that in August when they have all of their players and Kobe Mayo's not starting fights at second base and Holiday's still hitting the ball the way he's hitting it and Westberg is back and Cal. When
Yeah,
they have that team,
they'll be better.
I will hear that they're an above 500 team, even with this pitching, and they're not going to be making trade deadline deals. I mean, you mentioned the Eflin deal last year as something that would be potential, maybe, but I'm not counting on them dealing off the bottom of the deck to get real pitching they're going to use next year. Maybe a Trevor Rogers or something. Maybe there'll be some sort of deal like that, but they're not going to be a better pitching staff in August unless Grayson Rodriguez and Bradish are back and if they
Tyler
are,
Wells.
then we'll start to look at them the way we looked at them in February, which is this young, upwardly mobile team, not a team with a bunch of quad A guys in a lineup and a bunch of quad A guys pitching and old farts.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, if the trade deadline, if it's going to bring anything, it's going to be some subtraction, right? It's going to be some dealing a couple pending free agents. Could there be a move where there's someone that has club control for 26 or something of that nature? Sure. I mean,
Okay,
I
so
think,
who's getting dealt?
I
I
mean,
mean,
I think,
I don't even know. Does anybody
well,
want Mountcastle? You know what I mean?
no,
Are there
no,
play? Right,
no.
right.
Cedric Mullins, you look at Sagano and Eflin, just guys that could be dealt. I'm not saying they will be,
That's right.
but
Eflin, this is the end for him,
yeah,
right? He
but
just
you're
got here,
looking
but he can be gone. It's like Burnes, right? He's hurt.
anyone who has an expiring contract. Now, I think what you have to be mindful of, and where this does become a little more interesting, is what happens with some of these guys through the lens of qualifying offers, through the lens of do they take a qualifying offer or do they reject it and they sign elsewhere, and you get a comp pick. You get a draft pick, which I think in some cases you would question whether a draft pick is going to be more valuable than what you're going to get for a veteran rental. I certainly don't want to see them trade those guys just for the sake of doing it, right? Because this isn't a team that's in the mode that they were in 5 years ago, where you're tearing down, tearing down, tearing down, and building it for the long-term future. The idea here is still to try to get this team on track to think that they're going to be good and winning next year, right? I hope we're not giving up on that idea. And that's why I think it's so important for them to play well the rest of the year, play well in the second half of the season, get guys back healthy, get guys trending in the right direction, especially the young core. And that's not to say everything's going to go perfectly. I mean, we saw over the weekend. I mean, they lose Cedric Mullins to a hamstring on Friday, Mountcastle during Friday's game, and then he goes on the IL. And so, it looks like they're going, Kowser's going to be back this week. I assume Westberg's going to be back this week. They both have played some games, even at Norfolk. So whether it's for Tuesday night or whether it's later on in the trip, I'm fully expecting that. But you've got to find a way to stay healthy. I mean, we mentioned the pitching. I mean, the starting rotation has looked better of late. Are they going to stay healthy, right? I mean, we're seeing it around baseball. Corbin Burnes left Sunday's game in Arizona with elbow tightness. I mean, this is the game. And, there's a much bigger discussion across the league to be had that we'll continue to have. But that's the big
When you
question.
got $200 million in them, it's worse than having your feelings hurt.
Oh,
It's
no
worse than
question.
Grayson Rodriguez being hurt, right?
This is why I haven't hammered, for as much as I've been critical of Mike Elias in a lot of ways, that element, and I don't mean Burnes specifically, I mean being reluctant to dip your toes into the most lucrative of contracts for pitchers. But that said, how the Orioles have operated opposed to that doesn't work either. You've got to find some middle ground.
Yeah,
You're
but
going
the
to have to
fan
take some
base
risks.
blaming Elias Corbin Burnes didn't want to be here.
Well, and that's
Like,
the thing too.
and I had that conversation in Vegas with intelligent people. Yeah, they should have offered more. They should have done value in years. And I'm like, what's values in years to a guy makes $200 million and his wife wants to be in Arizona where it's 90 degrees every day? Like, you ever been to Arizona? It's nicer there than it is here in a general sense. You've been here last 2 weeks. It's nicer there. So like the notion that it's the team's fault that a guy who wanted to sign elsewhere, like, it's like blaming me for my ex-girlfriend not wanting to marry me 25 years ago. She didn't want to be here. That's it. I mean, so the Burnes thing, the fan base that's uppity about that, now that this injuries happen, maybe it'll quell them down a little bit. But I mean, giving $200 million to a guy that doesn't want to be here is stupid.
It's
That's
more
really stupid. That's
it's
bad business.
it's more the systemic issue, right? It's more the pitching across the board. The idea that, okay, you're not drafting pitchers in the first and second round of the draft, fine. Because at the same time, that's much more volatile trying to develop someone like that rather than a college hitter, which is what the Orioles have. But we've talked about it, and I don't want to make this all about Corbin Burnes because there are other issues on the field from the weekend that we can talk about. But for me, it's more the systemic issue. It's more, okay, you're not going to give big time contracts. Fine. I understand that. And I'll continue to say, even though a lot of people will disagree, I still think that was a legitimate offer that the Orioles gave him. Okay, it was shorter, yes, but they gave him a much higher average annual value than what he took in Arizona. It wasn't like it's not like he got 5 years, $200 million, and the Orioles offered 3 years, $120 million, where you'd say, well, it was $40 million either way per year.
Well, in the old days, Peter would just lie about whatever he was offering.
Sure. I mean, the Teixeira,
in
yeah,
this case,
right.
with Corbin Burnes, he sort of confirmed it, right?
They took a different approach. Their offer was different. I understand why Corbin Burnes didn't want to take that offer on top of the idea that it was pretty indicative. He wanted to go to Arizona. His family's there. He wanted to be on the West Coast, all that. But it's not as though they offered a completely inferior offer across the board because they did give him more money per year. And there was absolutely a way to frame that if if you're Corbin Burnes and Scott Boras and he actually wanted to be in Baltimore, you easily can frame that as, hey, we took more money per year and he's going to get another bite at the apple being 2 years younger than he would have been in Arizona at the expiration of the deal. So again, I don't want to make this about Burnes. We've talked about Burnes 20 times,
And
but
I don't know
it's
how
a
much better he would have made the team, but the perception at the top that he starts opening day and is there every fifth day instead of Charlie Morton every fifth
and it's
day,
well, it's
that
great.
might have been a different kind of catalyst for them. But I'm still going to go back to no Cowser, no Westberg. Rutschman
Sure.
stinks. The rest of the pitching stinks.
Let's face it,
Just
man.
in a general sense,
This,
there's
this
nothing was going
year
to save this season for them right now.
this year has been so problematic in so many ways, and ways that, yes, you hold them accountable, and also ways where you just say, I don't know how you can plan for that, right? I don't know if you can plan for every single injury that's happened, for every single individual underperformance that's happened. I don't know how you plan. As I've said to you, as much as Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde, who's already been held accountable, and we'll continue to talk about the rest of the front office, ownership, coaching staff, players themselves. As I've said to you, if you kind of look at it on a bell curve, I think this has been a scenario of a crazy sequence of events and imperfect events that have happened where, a storm of just a lot of stuff going wrong where, this feels like a bottom 1 or 2% worst case scenario that's played out in a lot of ways. And I don't, you know, that's not to excuse it. No, you have to address it. You have to look at it. The injuries have happened to the degree that you've got to look at your strength and conditioning program because you continue to have these soft tissue injuries. I mean, we talked about this with the Ravens with Steve Saunders 5 years ago, right? Or 3 years ago, whatever it was. And they made changes. The Orioles did make changes in the offseason. I mean, they made some changes to their training staff and things of that nature. The question is, did they make the right changes? We talked about the coaching staff, right? I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention they brought in John Mabry over the weekend. Longtime major league player, longtime major league coach. I mean, Ryan O'Hearn spoke very flattering words about him. It was with him in Kansas City. He said that Mabry was someone who kept him sane as he was on the
I
bench.
covered John Mabry.
Yeah.
I had his
County,
baseball card.
he's a Cecil County guy, grew up, his family were Orioles fans. So is that going to save their season? No, of course not. I'm not suggesting anything crazy. Can he help though? Sure. Right. I mean, really, if this team's going to salvage anything out of this season, and I don't mean making the playoffs, that ship has sailed, right? It's sailed. I mean, even after this 3-game sweep, you're 14 games under 500. I mean, they have to play at an insane clip just to get back to 500. But you can play better baseball. You
They
can
don't
feel
lose on
better
the
about
West
yourself.
Coast this week. If you and I get together next week and they haven't lost this week, then we'll start talking about
It's a little more fun, sure.
Get me down to double digits under 500, but like
in June,
winning 3 after you just lost 2 doesn't move me much.
Yeah.
I saw the Cardinals. I mean, but just in where they are and going to this West Coast thing, the uptick is O'Hearn and Holiday were uptick last week. I don't want to but the uptick to me is Charlie Morton. The uptick is getting pitching, just getting some kind of pitching that I could put the game on at 11:35 tomorrow night, and they might be in the 5th inning, and it might be 3-2 instead of 7-1.
Well, and
the starting pitching was so bad in April and early May that it gave them no chance, really.
Right, no question. Well, and think about this. You know how much I beat up on the offense, and I will continue to do that when it's warranted. Right now, I mean, to your point, you look at the lineup and you have about 3 or 4 guys that you really feel any semblance of decency about, and the rest are guys where you say, "Oh, who's Chadwick Trump? Who are half these guys?" I mean, you go down the list.
I do not want that jersey, by the way.
Right. Well, I mean, they DFA'd him anyway, but I mean, they have Cooper Hummel. I mean, they have guys that you've never heard of before that are playing right now. I mean, it's just where they are right now. But they are going to get some guys back healthy. You hope that the health stabilizes. I feel like I've tried to say that 2 or 3 times, and then they lose 2 more guys or they lose someone else. But you look at this weekend. If I just told you before the weekend, or if I told you 2 weeks ago let's say, just for the point of what I'm about to say here, 2 weeks ago, I told you the Orioles were going to play we knew they were going to play the White Sox. They were going to score 2 runs, 4 runs, and 3 runs. You're probably thinking, oh, they probably lost 2 out of 3 at maybe at best. They pitched well. So, and that's not to say that their starting rotation is going to be great moving forward, but they are pitching better. I mean, Charlie Morton, let's call a spade a spade. He's been really good the last 2 starts. It's too little too late. It doesn't make up for what happened the first 6 weeks
Well,
of the
this
season,
speaks to the
but
analytics of your game, and Charlie Morton would have been cut 20 years ago. They were looking at spin rate, they were looking at
the
speed,
stuff was
velocity.
still
They,
there.
they were looking at all of that and saying it's not playing, but
It was the
it,
command. I mean, his command wasn't there, but the velocity was
what was number
fine.
one pitch? If you can't throw your if you
And the
can't throw your
right. I
curveball,
mean,
right?
the difference has been the curveball has become a plus pitch again for him, right? I mean, that's what. And the
It's
thing
what
about
kept him
Charlie,
in the big leagues for 20 years. What
well,
made him
and and and,
$200 million?
and regardless of this individual 1 year, $15 million deal, what they saw in him was someone who had experience, someone who had always figured it out. I've said to you, even before we started talking about Charlie Morton's immense struggles to the point where he was in the bullpen for the Orioles, you look at the history of his career, go back and look. This is a guy who reinvented himself multiple times. I mean, he was someone that in Pittsburgh was part of the two-seam fastball, infield shifting, get ground balls. He was one of those guys and had success with that for a while, and then he didn't. And then he wound up in Houston, and they said, Charlie, you've got a really good curveball. Throw it more. And that was basically the gist of what made him an all-star caliber pitcher. Then for the second half of his career with that curveball, which was at its best one of the very best pitches in baseball. I mean, this is someone who's had these ruts and peaks and valleys in the past, not to this degree. I mean, he was at a loss for words of why it was that bad, right? There's 5 ERA bad, and then there's 10 ERA where you say, how do you continue to run this guy out there? They put him in the bullpen. It was shaky there for a while, but he did pitch better out of the bullpen starting about the second week of May. And they got to the point where Kyle Gibson wasn't showing any evidence of the stuff being good enough or anything where you could say, okay, we could try to mold this, we can try to tweak this. The baseline performance from Gibson in their mind, there wasn't enough there to play with. Now, I'll point out, Kyle Gibson signed a deal with the Rays. We're going to see if the Rays can fix him, and if they do, that'll not look great for the Orioles, right? And we've kind of talked about that element of what's gone wrong in
I would
2025.
think
But
there was absolute chaos by the time that Kyle Gibson got into the
I
rotation.
mean,
By
they
the
were
time he
just.
got into the rotation, there was no time
I mean, you're
to
just you're
to
just
give him, but they
feeling.
gave him a lot of money, and I don't know why they threw him out the side door that quickly, but I think all of that they threw the manager out the side door the same weekend. So
Sure. I mean, you just look. They've been reeling in every way. I mean, I've made the comment so many times to you at this point where, in terms of just every phase of the game, talking pitching, starting pitching, relief pitching, offense, defense, base running. I've made this comment that they haven't exuded any redeeming qualities. They haven't done. There's nothing you can point to other than individual performance here and there, where you'd say, oh, they're not good at this, this, and this, but they are really good at this. There hasn't been any of that. They've been that bad across the board. So yeah, I mean, you get to the point, and even talking to a couple of these guys on Sunday, I mean, Brian Baker got the save on Sunday because Batista pitched on Friday and Saturday, did a nice job with it.
and threw a
But he,
lot of pitches too.
yeah, but he, Baker did a nice job, and he was kind of asked about where the team is. Morton was asked about it. He said that they do have a different feeling right now. Again, we're not talking about saving their season through the lens of suddenly getting back in the wild card race or anything. There's no suddenly when you're 14 games under 500. This is a grind just to get to a point where maybe you can talk about being close to 500 at some point in the second half of the season. But they are playing better. And when you play better, you win a couple series, you sweep for the first time all year, even if it is against the lowly White Sox who really stink, uh, you're going to feel better. And that is something that you're hoping that they're starting to that that the worm's starting to turn a little bit in that regard, at least to the point where, can you start approaching series and say, okay, before it was feeling like, how do we not be, how do we avoid being swept, knowing you're very likely going to lose 2 out of 3? Can you now start to approach these series differently and say, hey, let's win 2 out of 3? Let's win 2 out of 3. I mean, Seattle's a good team. They're going to have their work cut out for them in that regard, but they're not invincible. It's baseball. Try to win 2 out of 3, and a big part of that is going to be, well, how does Sagano pitch on Tuesday night? How does Povich pitch on Wednesday? They'll have Eflin going in the finale on the afternoon Thursday. So, it, Morton said this, and he wasn't being ironic. He knows how poorly he pitched for the first 7 weeks of the season, but he said it, and we all know it. Starting pitching does kind of, in most cases, drive the bus. That's why the Orioles were kind of doing this in an unorthodox way anyway, in how they were trying to build this thing. But when your pitching is as horrid as it was over the first 7 weeks of the season, yeah, you're going to find yourself 15, 16, 17, 18 games under 500, unless you're hitting the heck out of the ball. And we know they haven't done that either. And a big part of that at this point is, I mean, just look at the lineup. They're not healthy. They've got to get guys back. I mean, they're going to start getting some guys back. And, you're hoping that Gunnar Henderson gets hot. You're hoping that Adley Rutschman at some point starts looking something like what he used to look like. I mean, I get a little more skeptical and concerned as more time goes on, and that we're getting further and further away from that guy.
Don't we all?
Yeah, I mean, Rutschman's I mean, it's actually funny, Nestor. I spent some time, pulling back the curtain here. I spent some time over the weekend. I had a phone conversation with Alan McCallum. I hadn't talked to Alan in a while. It wasn't something where we said, oh, we should be recording this on the radio.
See, I want that on the radio.
No, but we were just talking, right? And we could do something
By the
like
way,
that
I
at some
was
point. With Zoom, we could do that. But
I was at the funeral of Jim Henneman, and I had two different people within 20 minutes come up to me and tell me how much they love Alan on the radio.
Yeah,
no offense to you, but they were like,
no
hey, I
offense
heard
taken.
Alan last week. These are old school listeners, right?
Yeah.
And people who knew Alan from the press box when Jim Henneman was always in the press box. So yeah, absolutely. So what does it say to you that he doesn't say to me? Is he telling you secrets?
No, we were just, it's funny because I've said to you how many times I've felt flabbergasted, right? How I felt dumbfounded about why things have been this bad. Not that the Orioles have struggled. Everyone can see reasons why they've struggled, but why it's been so bad across the board. And we both, it's funny, we talked and at the end of our conversation, we joked, said, we haven't solved anything. I mean, it really just, but we were talking about Adley Rutschman, and it's just, of all the guys that have struggled, look, in the case of Gunnar, look, it might just be that the player he was in the first half of last year, maybe he's not going to be an MVP candidate, but that doesn't mean he can't be an all-star shortstop. That doesn't mean he's not going to be a very valuable player. And it's not as though he's been terrible over the last year. Far from it. I mean, go look. I mean, in terms of wins above replacement and things of that nature, he's still been a valuable player. It's just
Gary Larkin went to the Hall of Fame hitting 280 with 25 home runs.
Right. He hasn't been MVP of the league in the same way.
He needs to hit 310 and hit 38 home runs. I don't know.
Cal Ripken was MVP of the league in 83 and 91. He wasn't that the rest of his career, but he was still a heck of a player. But and you look at Jackson Holliday, right? He's looking like a guy who has a chance to be an all-star at second base, because go look around. Who are the great second basemen in baseball? I mean, he's putting up nice numbers, and he's got a chance to do that. But
I wonder if he really wanted to play second base. I don't think he really had a choice.
I mean, there's some of that. I mean, I would question. It's funny because I've seen fans debate about this, and I mean like intelligent debate about this, where you kind of look at this. I mean, Gunnar is up and down and kind of finicky at shortstop.
In any other system, he would have been the shortstop. He would be the shortstop if somebody else drafted him, other than maybe the Royals.
Probably, but at the same time, I'm not sure the arm plays quite as well at shortstop.
He always looks like such a little guy.
Yeah.
I've never stood next to him, but against everybody else,
he's not tall.
The fact that he was 20 years old, he's kind of a small guy.
He's not tall, but he's muscular. I mean, you look at him and you say he's filled out.
But he's built more like Joe Morgan than he's built like Cal Ripken.
Yeah, well, and he's built more like what you thought of a traditional shortstop was, right? I mean, Cal broke the mold, and we kind of see that continuing to happen. I mean, obviously the Lindors of the world aren't the biggest, but we've seen Cal. Jeter was on the bigger side.
If you looked at Jackson Holliday and stood him next to Gunnar Henderson, you'd say, put the tall guy at shortstop. Put the big
Yeah,
kid at shortstop as if we
it
were
is.
picking up teams.
I mean, again, you go back to Cal Ripken. He changed all that 40 plus years
But I
ago.
mean, when I
Well,
see
Earl Weaver
Holiday at
changed
second
it.
base, I just think there's a kid who grew up thinking he was going to be a shortstop or third baseman in
Yeah.
the big leagues.
Well,
He's playing on the other side of the field at this point, and it's by force, not by choice. So the
well,
fact that you're going to say, well, he could be an all-star second baseman, fair enough, but I don't think that was in his dad's eye or his eye 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
and
That's
that's
all.
fair. But I would also say any organization that's truly worth its salt in terms of drafting, you're drafting shortstops, you're drafting center fielders, but a lot of times those shortstops become center fielders in the minor leagues. You're drafting, you draft up the middle because the idea is if you can play shortstop, then you should be able to play second base or third base or move to at least a corner outfield spot. But if you draft someone that's a third baseman or you draft someone that's already a left fielder, like the Orioles when they drafted DJ Stewart a decade ago, if he can't play that spot, where can he play? Right.
It's like
So,
Kobe Mayo or Heston
it-
Kjerstad.
but
They've drafted a lot of guys with big bat and no glove. They have.
but Kobe Mayo, but even Kobe Mayo was drafted as a shortstop, though. I mean, Ryan Mountcastle was a shortstop, right? I mean that's kind of how it works.
That's
I mean,
laughable to think those guys were going to play shortstop in the big
well,
leagues now that we
I
know what
don't.
we know.
Let me be clear. I don't think anyone expected that those guys were going to play shortstop in the major leagues. But the idea is you want to have a baseline. It's no different than in the NFL. Yes, Eric DaCosta and the Ravens will tell you that they want guys that are productive in college. But what else do you need? You need the athleticism. You need the physical traits. We know that there are plenty of guys that can be college legends, and they can't play a lick at the NFL level because they don't have the
Well,
physical
that's where they
traits for it.
project stuff onto
Oh
Adafe
yeah,
Owe and
but it's no
players like
different.
that. In
But it's no
baseball,
different. Well, what I'm talking about was shortstops in baseball, shortstops and center fielders. I mean,
best athlete available.
exactly. And then you figure out where they're going to play. So,
But you mentioned Jackson Holliday at second base and blossoming and being an all-star. That's an interesting thing because we talk growth mindset. We talk about that in a general sense. There's
sure.
a kid that they said go play second base. He said, "Sure, I'll just go be an all-star in my
Well,
second year."
and
Right.
and let's be clear, it certainly helps when in 2023, when he's ascending and getting closer and closer to debuting. Look, he's not dumb. Matt Holliday, they're not dumb. They see that Gunnar Henderson's rookie of the year. They see that Gunnar Henderson's going to be a guy that looks like he's going to, at that point in time, I mean, obviously he hasn't played quite as well.
And Westberg was playing second base at that time.
Right. I mean, and even last year, right. Exactly. You had Gunnar Henderson, all-star shortstop. You had Jordan Westberg, either all-star third baseman or second baseman, obviously bouncing back and forth. So that's where it's an easier sell where you say, all right, yeah, in an ideal world, I'd stay at shortstop, but that Gunnar Henderson's pretty good and that Jordan Westberg's pretty good. So, you want buy-in from that in that way, but we'll see how this evolves. I mean,
And Henderson kicked the ball around a little bit too. There might be a point where they would look at Holiday and say play shortstop and Henderson third, maybe
I mean,
down the line. I don't know, maybe.
I think that's at least a fair possibility. And where it would be interesting would be if you do clean house and you have new coaching staff. Heck, if you have a new general manager and a new front office, they might view that differently. They might say, we think our optimal defense will be Gunnar Henderson at third base, Jackson Holliday at shortstop, and Jordan Westberg at second base. Now, I'm not doing that in the middle of a season, but if you're
I might
talking
do it in
about,
the middle of a bad season.
well, I mean, sure,
Might do it in
but
September.
at the same time, I mean, the reality, part of the part of what I would like to see them do, and they've done a lot of this with the positional versatility, and I like that. Don't get me wrong, because it does make for a more complete roster when you have guys that can play a couple different spots.
Except for
You're going to have
Mateo in
injuries.
center field.
You're going to have injuries.
And
Well, yeah,
Kjerstad right field.
right. There's too much of a good thing, right? I mean, certainly, and I'm not talking about Jorge Mateo in center or, the extreme examples, but at the same time, I would like to see them stick with guys. I like the fact that when they made the decision to move Gunnar Henderson to shortstop, they've kept him there, right? That you haven't seen Gunnar continue to make sporadic starts at third base like he was a couple years ago when they started making that transition. And part of that was Mateo, they thought was a borderline starting caliber player, and then he proved that he wasn't. So at that point, you said, okay, we're going to play Gunnar at short. So
And Urias is more than decent with the glove.
yeah, but and that was the thing with Holiday for me that where I kind of took the organization to task was it should have been very apparent in 23 that he probably wasn't going to be their major league shortstop. So why didn't you start getting him much more extensive time at second base instead of, I think he only played maybe 20 or 25 starts at second base that year. He still played a lot of short. I don't know if I can't remember if he played much third. Westberg moved all over the place, but all these guys remain primarily at shortstop, where you kind of look at it and say, if you think he's going to be a second baseman, let him play that. Let him master that. Let him get really, really good at that. And that's something that I think kind of ended up being a hindrance for Jackson Holiday last year, where he was still legitimately really trying to learn and get comfortable at second base, in addition to, oh, yeah, trying to face and hit major league pitching for the first time in your
He
career.
looked
So,
a little lost on that fly
yeah, I
ball
mean, it was
that
just a
first
lot.
game or that second game that he in the big
Yeah.
leagues, and that was
And now you're seeing someone who's comfortable at the plate. He's still he's still a work in progress at second base. I mean, he had a couple miscues over the weekend, but he's looked better at second base than he did last year. But and we're going to see how this evolves. I mean, a lot of this is going to depend on with especially bigger players like Gunnar Henderson. I mean, it might be where they look at the defensive metrics and they say we probably need to move Gunnar to third. That you'll accept that. The problem is when you have guys that are playing third and then they're not good enough to play third, and then you're like, okay, well, are you going to play a corner outfield spot? Are you going to play first base? I mean, it's kind of where Kobe Mayo is at this point in time, right? I mean, Kobe Mayo is not a major league third baseman in my mind. So we're going to see if he can be a
he
major
would
league
be if
first
he hit
baseman.
291 with
Well,
31
he's got it.
bombs.
I mean, and that's of course all these you have to hit, right? I mean, there's that. I mean, the problem with Mountcastle at this point, and I'm not trying to pick on someone who's on the IL right now, but I mean, Ryan Mountcastle's where's the power? It's been gone since last July. I don't care how good of a defensive first baseman he's become. If you have if you're a 600 OPS kind of first baseman, where yeah, I think he has a total of 4 home runs since early July of last year. I mean, that doesn't play. I mean, you can't be a major league first baseman with that as your slash line. So we're going to see how this plays out, and you want to get these guys back healthy. You Colton Cowser hasn't played since March 30th. Jordan Westberg hasn't played since the end of April. Get these guys back.
What's the timeline on those cats?
They should be.
As we wrap this thing
I
up.
mean, Cowser's definitely going to be back this week. I mean, they've already said as much. Westberg started his rehab assignment a little bit after Cowser, but he also wasn't out quite as long. So I don't think it's impossible that we're going to see both these guys on the road trip. And Laureano should be really close. I know Tyler O'Neill's starting to do baseball activities and starting to swing the bat. He's going to go on a rehab assignment, as he should, because they should get Tyler O'Neill some rehab games to try to get going with the bat. I mean, this guy hit, regardless of the injury history, he did hit 30 plus home runs for the Red Sox last year. It's not as though he's incapable of playing Major League Baseball. So,
Can I say something on him? Because we haven't talked about him
go
at all.
ahead,
I
sure.
think he's not even on the team. And
Oh,
he's
he's
biggest
forgotten.
acquisition.
Sure, I agree.
The amazing thing about, and this is the novice radio in me in the 90s, right? Like when I first came on the radio, the first 10 years, I'd always say, if you signed a guy and you give him a contract and on June 2nd, you couldn't give him away for it, no one would want him. That's really an
Not
indictment.
good. Yeah.
I mean, it's really an indictment to say like that no one would take him or that contract. It tells you how awful it was, and it says that you're really the outlier. You made a huge mistake. You know what I mean? Like with a guy like that and a bat like that, like I of all the mistakes in the offseason, it's not signing Santander. It's you gave money to the wrong people, wrong pitchers in a lot of
Sure.
cases, wrong everything. I don't know how Elias is going to survive this, right? Like I started to write a letter to Rubenstein. I started to write a letter to Katie Griggs because I attended Jim Henneman's funeral last week and I got a lot of baseball information because I've been around baseball. So what happened? Imagine when I'm around baseball people. That's why they don't want me to have a press pass because then how dangerous I'd be because people talk to me. Everybody talks to me except them because they don't know me. But I started to think about where Rubenstein is because you and I beat him up pretty good last week and he deserves it and he's still hiding. Katie Griggs is still in witness protection from what I can tell. We've talked about tickets and sponsorships and like all of that stuff. But then there's the baseball side of this of like, Well, I know Rubenstein's going to survive. That's why I wrote what the headline that I wrote over the weekend. There's only one man that's going to fix this. That's the owner, because he's the owner. I remember the old owner. He outlived everyone. He outlived every Sid Thrift, every Buck Showalter, every Mike Hargrove, every Mike Flanagan, every Pat Gillick. The Orioles were effed up and are effed up because Peter Angelos was effed up. And trying to get out of underneath of that with every Adam Jones and every Cal Ripken and every Brooks Robinson and every feel good. And to your point, no one cares about any of them. They care about like Kobe Mayo and are we going to win tonight? Are we going to win tomorrow? That's all that can matter, even though they can show all the Oriole magic on the scoreboards and try to get our juices flowing with old uniforms and orange pumpkin uniforms and anything else that would get us and keep us interested in a team that's 15 games under 500. Rubenstein's going to survive this. I don't know whether, I mean, the last guy that ran this baseball club, a guy named John Vidalin, Vidalin, you've never heard of him because John Angelos hired him. He came here, sat at the desk for 90 days and said, I'm out. Like literally just disappeared. I haven't seen Katie Griggs appear since what, last September? When's the last time she appeared in front of media, in front of the world, in front of her fan base, in front of anyone that's they did a pat on the back for her over in what used to be the press box in the football stadium, and they put her pictures up. The Ravens did this for her. The Ravens did a big back slap for her and brought her over and did a whole no media because we wouldn't have any media there. It'd be like the CEO club, no media at the event. But they did do the only time Katie Griggs has shown up on in my world was at the Ravens stadium. I'm talking about LinkedIn with people I know, and I know everybody. They did a thing and welcome her to sea level, and it was a big country club wing ding thing in the Black Wing. And I'm going to say that was friggin' February or March. I mean, I haven't seen her on television. I haven't seen her on radio. I haven't seen her quoted. So I'm beginning to wonder, and nobody knows her. Nobody I know's met her. I don't even, I don't know. So I don't know if she's going to survive, but I don't know how Mike Elias survives this. I don't know how he comes back in the offseason and handles Mr. Rubenstein's money, the entire franchise, hiring the new manager, all of that, especially when the guy who made a bobblehead of himself doesn't know anything about baseball. He doesn't know anything about baseball. So I don't know who's going to make that decision. He's a billionaire. He's not going to sit around all day and interview candidates. What's he going to do? What are they going to do? The way they found Katie Griggs, send a headhunter out to hire your team president who has 4 mutual connections with me in Baltimore when she takes the job, and you expect her to go out and conduct business here? These people don't know what they're doing. And that's going to be Michael Lester came up to me at the funeral last week. He didn't want to hear this, but he asked me about what do you think of the team? I said, the owner doesn't know what he's doing. That's really problematic. And he trusts people whom he shouldn't. And the Mike Elias thing, he might be trusting Mike Elias too much, not enough. Who knows? He's a billionaire. It's like Bisciotti sitting with John Harbaugh. Hey, it's keeps you up at night. Doesn't bother me. You know, you got problems. I'm a billionaire. I don't have any problems. I don't. It certainly feels that way with Rubenstein. This is either going to be fun or he's not going to be a part of it. Yet the fans are in, and the business people are in, and the players are in. I'm wondering about the leadership of the leadership because I have no confidence in it. I have zero confidence in Greg Bader, Jennifer Grandal, Katie Griggs, any of these people to run the business. And you and all the baseball people are throwing rocks at Elias. I'm throwing rocks at the owner because I know he doesn't know what he's doing. And I know he's surrounded by people who are adults because I've dealt with them. They don't even know the first thing about being nice to people. They're being mad at me because a dead guy's dead. Like, it's insane. And the stadium's empty, and all of the problems they have with mass and streaming, ticket sales, revenue, all of that they dreamed up a year and a half ago about how this was going to be a rocket ship and they were going to pick up 12% this year and 15% next year, and the All-Star game was going to add 18% to their base of the base of the base of the analytics of the fan base of the graphs of the charts, because that's who Katie Griggs is. She's not a baseball mother hen. She's a bean counter. And there's not a lot of beans to count. You were at the stadium last week. I just think the whole thing's problematic. And if they're taking an elevator to the top, and Cal Ripken and David Rubenstein are getting together and praying about all of this and trying to figure it out. But Elias feels lame duck to me in a way, in a big way. And I don't know. It's June 2nd. That's first and foremost for me.
I mean, we're going to see. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what would reflect that he's a lame duck definitively, other than just the team's bad. I mean,
Well, what will define that? Is he going to hire the next manager or is he not?
he runs baseball operations. I mean, I've said this before. He runs baseball operations. I mean, he hired Brandon Hyde. Now, did John Angelos have some semblance of being in the loop on that and everything?
But John
Sure,
thought he knew baseball. John was picking Sid Fernandez and Chris Sable
but
and
he did.
playing.
But he
But
didn't.
David Rubenstein is not that guy.
But John Angelos didn't know baseball, and John and Lou Angelos and Brady, they managed to hire Mike Elias. And look, we could
They
say
hired
where.
Mike Elias because Eric DaCosta told John to do it. That's
Oh,
really the truth.
but my
That's a God's honest truth. That's really what happened.
my point is that just because an owner doesn't know something doesn't mean that can't have people around that are going to make good
Who are the
recommendations.
people around him? That's
Well,
my point. If the people around you are Brady Anderson and Buck Showalter and Rick Dempsey and you know
I
what I
mean,
mean, like that's fine.
clearly he has Cal Ripken around. And look, I'm not saying Cal himself is going to make the decision, but lots of people know Cal Ripken, and
And where's he?
I mean he's still coming out to games pretty regularly. I mean, you see him sitting in the front row,
Are we
but
above asking him? Is his kid above asking him what he's doing? Is he really a figurehead? Is he getting paid 20 grand to sit behind home plate every? I don't
I
like.
don't know.
What's your role, Cal? And what's your role going to be?
Well, I mean, he
What,
doesn't have. I mean, let's
they're in
face it.
last place. These are fair questions. These are all fair. I mean,
But
nobody's off limits here if you're going to be a part of this. And it's one of the reasons Cal probably didn't want to run this thing for years and years for Peter because he knew it couldn't be successful with Peter. He knew it couldn't be successful.
right. So, but to go back to your original point, I'm not at all convinced that Mike Elias is lame duck. Now, that's not me saying that he's definitely keeping his job moving forward, but it's all conjecture at this point. You know, you know why you would know if he's a lame duck if someone was brought in that was added to the organ. In the way that the Orioles just hired John Mabry to the coaching staff, if they hired an executive that had experience that was joining the front office, that's
If
where you would
Pat
wonder.
Gillick was coming in as the
Yeah,
special
like as an
executive
advisor,
to
you'd say, okay,
right.
is this Rubenstein's guy, and Mike Elias is going to be gone in October. So and to be clear, I don't know. And I've said to you, look, for as much as I've criticized elements of what Elias has done, even going back 2 or 3 years ago, I mean, I've never looked at him as beyond reproach. At the same time, I also know how pathetic this organization's baseball operations were in 2018 when he arrived, and how much progress they have made. Now, that doesn't
The
mean.
Korean scouts banning the Orioles scouts in Korea.
Forget about Korea. The fact that they had no presence in the Dominican Republic, the fact that they had no international presence whatsoever. And look, I'm not saying that they have made every right decision. They obviously have not. They've had mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. I mean, the Ravens, they
My
just
point
drafted
is they're
11.
one of the worst teams in baseball. If I don't know anything and I'm the owner of the team and I signed up for this, I'd say maybe we need to get a new grocery
And they
picker.
might do that.
And
Look,
that's why I'm saying if Elias isn't lame duck, he should be. You know what I mean? At this point, just in a general sense, you're going to let him pick the next manager. You're going to let him You're going to give him another $100 million in the offseason to go find more player. I don't know. I'm feeling like that he's not here for forever. He won't
okay.
be here 5 years from
And,
now.
and to be clear, I'm not saying that I disagree necessarily. I'm just saying I can't sit here and say with any conviction that I think he's lame duck or not. I really don't know, because again, this season has been so outside the realm of our expectations. And that's even vividly remembering sitting at Pizza John's with you a week before the season started and telling you how underwhelmed I was by the offseason. That said, I didn't in any way fathom that they'd be 17 or 18 games under 500 in late May. I mean, I never thought that. I never expected it to be. I still don't understand why it's this bad, right? If you had told me everything that happened and and said they were 3 or 4 games under 500, maybe 5 games under 500, I'd say, yeah, when your pitching's like that and your offense is underperformed and you've had the injuries you've had, yeah, I can kind of see. But for it to completely have fallen apart and gone off the rails to the point where Brandon Hyde is gone, and we're sitting here talking in serious terms about Mike Elias's future, I never would have fathomed that. And again, that's speaking as someone who didn't love their offseason. So
We're talking
through
about Adley Rutschman's future right now,
right,
because if
so through
Basayo
that,
comes along in August and Rutschman's still hitting 205, I mean, dude,
I mean, they're not
you,
going to like get rid of him, but that dynamic could change. Sure. I don't know. I mean,
I mean,
who
how long
knows?
before you bench the starting quarterback once you make him your number one draft pick? You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
how much rope are you going to give him, because he's getting everybody else fired?
So yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so I don't know. That's why I'm so as disgusted as everyone feels having watched this season. And I've said to you, I mean, in my lifetime of watching the Orioles, I think this is easily the most disappointing team over the last 40 years relative to expectations. I mean,
Man, that's saying
1988,
something too, isn't it?
well, it is, but at the same time, I mean, think about it. 1988, okay, I get it. You start 0-21, that's historic. At the same time, no one had any designs that that team was going to be anything but bad that year. 2018, when they got off to such a horrendous start. 2010, I'll throw that in there, when the year Tremblay was canned and Buck came in later that summer. Those years, people thought, okay, maybe in 2010 they were at the point where they might be decent. They could be 500-ish. I think that's what the expectation was, but they weren't. No one was picking them to win the division or to contend and be a wild card. Same in 2018. At that point, everyone had kind of seen where the Orioles were at that point. Everyone was saying, you need to be trading Manny Machado. You need to be trading some of these guys because they're going to be free agents. And instead, Duquette and Buck and they tried to patchwork together one more run. And, they signed Cashner and Alex Cobb, and they were horrendous. But no one thought they were going to be anything more than maybe 500-ish at best. So this team was not that. This team was expected to be good. Whether you thought they were going to win 90 plus games or 87
They were
games.
expected to be a playoff team.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Vegas thought that. Go look at the over under for win totals. So through that lens, I mean, it's just been such a baffling season in terms of why it's been this bad. Again, we all see the reasons why they haven't been anywhere close to their peak, but for it to have fallen apart to the point where, okay, the pitching being bad, you could have anticipated that. Their offense being as bad as it's been, even with the injuries taken into account, just the underperformance, that surprised me. I mean, that has absolutely surprised me. That shocked me, quite frankly. I mean, I didn't think this was going to necessarily be the best offense in baseball, but they've been closer to bottom five than top five. And I think they were built with the thought of being a top five offense. Now, was there poor evaluation there? Were there missteps there? You mentioned Tyler O'Neill, of course. But I've said this has really been, you say a perfect storm when things come together. This has really been an imperfect storm of everything going wrong. So that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be held accountable. Let's be clear on that. I mean, even if I'm going to sit here and say I think Mike Elias should get one more offseason to see if you can get this thing moving back in the right direction, by no means am I going to sit here with the conviction to say that I'm 100% confident that he can do it. But at the same time, I'm also acknowledging, yeah, they have had a ton of injuries and a lot of things that have gone in ways that I just would not have expected them to go. So that's where I think these last 4 months are very fascinating in so many ways. And yeah, I think a lot of it's going to go a long way in determining whether Mike's going to be the guy this, after the season and still, buying the groceries and making the moves and handling the farm system. But I also think if you're him, look, you need to make changes. You need to make adjustments. You can't keep digging in the same way of doing things that you've done it, because clearly these things haven't worked. So,
Well, it's a little late to be drafting pitchers young at this
oh,
point.
sure,
You
sure.
know,
And look, and
the
again,
pitching is really
I don't have
no one would look at this from the outside as somebody else takes the job and says, "Where's the pitching in the
sure.
organization?" It's problematic.
At the same time, I don't think it necessarily stems from saying we don't want to draft pitchers in the first round. I don't think that necessarily was the fatal flaw here. I think there is a heck of a lot of volatility in drafting pitchers in the first round and knowing that you need your first round picks to hit, that that's especially high school pitchers. I mean, boy, that said, you have to account for it in the same way on the opposite end of the spectrum, giving pitchers nine-figure contracts, right? If you don't want to do that and you don't want to draft pitchers in the first round and high school pitchers in the first round, that's fine. Those are two extremes on the spectrum. You've got to do way more in between, and that's where they've clearly been lacking. Okay, you don't need to go sign Max Fried or Blake Snell or even Corbin Burnes on the deal that he wanted compared to the offer that you made. But how many names have I thrown out there in recent years where I've said you could have gotten Nathan Eovaldi when the Rangers did? That deal worked out really nicely for them, and I get it. He has his IL stints, and he's not always 100% healthy. But look, he was the Rangers' ace when they won the World Series, because DeGrom was on the shelf. But you know, I mentioned Eflin 2 off seasons before they got him. When the Rays signed him, Eflin was another pitcher where I thought that's the kind of guy that you can sign to a 2 or 3 year deal. It's not going to kill your payroll long term. Yes, it takes on some risk in the way that any player on a multi-year deal has some risk, but it's the kind of pitcher I thought would fit. Though that's it's the middle class, I suppose, of starting pitchers. That's where I think they've needed to take a little more risk and be a little more assertive in that market. That I think they really screwed the pooch, for lack of a better way of describing it. Because I think, they could have done better than Kyle Gibson. They certainly could have done better than Charlie Morton this past off season. So that said, at the same time, there were a lot of people out there that wanted them to sign Blake Snell. He's made what, 2 starts all year? It's also the game. So
High risk, high reward.
In a big picture sense, I also can see where they were coming from in trying to focus so much on their position talent. The problem is Heston Kjerstad doesn't look like a major league player right now. Kobe Mayo, we're going to see in this latest stint whether it's better. And even your guys that you thought, like Adley Rutschman, who was a 2-time All-Star, what's happened there? So they've got to get that figured out. I've said it. If they can't get this young core turned around, at least most of these guys turned around, and look, 1 or 2 of them may not be that good, right? I mean, that was always a possibility. But if they don't get that part of this right, then whether it's October next year or the year after that, they'll all be gone, right? I mean, they'll all
they're
be
not
gone.
buying Juan
No one
Soto
will
to your point
survive
either, right?
if their young core if they don't get their young core straightened out here in the next few months, no one's going to survive. I mean, it's that simple.
Luke Jones will survive a late night baseball all week. We are in Seattle and Sacramento, even though my thing still says Oakland. I don't know. The Orioles return home on the 10th next Tuesday against the Detroit Tigers. We're going to be on a Thursday at Greenmount Station in Hampstead. I will have the Back to the Future scratch-offs from the Maryland Lottery. This is the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. We already got some guests booked. My pal Howard Scher is going to be coming out. We'll talk some hockey on Friday. Barry Trotz is going to be joining us here this week on the eve of the Stanley Cup Finals. Also, Brandon Stokely is going to join us from Denver, Colorado this week, talk a little football with us. Get some friends of Jim Irsay together here this week and talking about that while we talk some football. Also, my pal Tom Cousins, former Sacramento Bee sports editor, will be here to discuss his lifelong love of the Orioles. He told me he's going to wear his hat, his jersey, the whole deal from out in Sacramento as the Orioles. Luke, if I were still in the fanboy chasing business, I would have gone to Sacramento just to see a game there because I've
Yeah.
seen games in so many different stadia. It's sort of my little weird thing. I don't know. I'm getting old now. I'm sort of giving up on that. At some point, I'll get to Atlanta too. Seattle late night. Oakland, Sacramento over the weekend. I'm still gonna call.
Oaklamento. That
I'm gonna
John
call them Oakland for at least the next 10 years,
I
right?
saw John Miller and the Giants broadcast. They played a couple weeks ago, and apparently they were calling them Oakland, not on purpose. Although you kind of wonder the Bay Area thing. You wonder, but I don't know if it's John Miller or his broadcast partner. Apparently they started calling them Oaklamento. I think that's kind of the nice compromise name there.
That's guy. John Miller came up with that.
I think so
I haven't
too.
talked to John in 20 years, but that sounds like him. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking. Baltimore positive with my good-looking Coppin State shirt.